Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and it's been a long and excruciating off-season off the back of a frustrating and disappointing 2024. But the light at the end of the tunnel is fast approaching, and we're just weeks away from hopping on the Demon juggernaut, or is that roller coaster, for another ride. Now, before I introduce my co-host tonight, I want to start with an apology to our audience. Many of you reached out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and via PM on Demonland asking if and when we'd be doing our annual season review show. And after last year's frustrating and disappointing season, followed by the cluster truck that was Trade Week, the resignations of both our president and CEO, and the general sense of doom and gloom surrounding the club, I was just completely spent. I couldn't bring myself to get behind the mic, but the good news is I'm back, I'm refreshed, I'm rejuvenated, and, you know, pre-seasons at Demonland, it's the most wonderful time of the year. As reports from our track watchers roll in with tales of new recruits and players training the house down, it's impossible not to get fired up and ready and raring to go. And so we're back, and joining me tonight is a quarter of a century veteran of Demonland. That's George. Good evening, George.
Has it been that long? Goodness gracious.
It has.
Welcome to... Thanks, Andy. Welcome back, Andy. Welcome back to Midnight.
George.
If only. Hey, welcome back to all our listeners for season 2025. And the big question will be, so what will it be this year? Glass half full, glass half empty, glass overflowing, or glass broken? Well, at least with the Demonland podcast team, you're going to get the whole range of options. So let's get into it.
Well, you know where I stand there, and just on that quarter of a century, Demonland brings up our quarter of a century this year. And George, I was 23 years old when Demonland started, and I'll be turning 49 later this year. So Demonland has been with me. Demonland's been with me for longer than it was.
More than half your life is what you're trying to say there.
What I'm trying to say. I'm just so discombobulated.
All right, putting the pressure on you, Andy. How long have you been married?
Well, that was 2005. What are we now? It's coming up on 20 years.
You've been married to Demonland longer. Congratulations.
That's true, but I have been with my wife for longer than Demonland. She has been around for the entirety of Demonland. And yes, doesn't she deserve a trophy for that? Also joining us tonight, someone who was not affected one little bit by the MFC's house almost burning down in the off-season, and that's Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. I am pumped to be back. God, that was a long 6 months. It was awesome. Like this whole business of not making finals, it was like a flashback to the 80s or something, where you enjoyed a proper off-season break. So don't look back in anger, Andy. 24 is behind us, rear view mirror. It's only positive looking forward now. So I'm really excited. I'd like to, just before we go on, just in case I forget it, I want to thank all of the track watchers on Demonland. George, you, Ghost Rider, everyone who's
Kev Martin, Pickett Chance. There's lots of D Spencer.
Kev Martin, Slutty. How do you pronounce it?
Fast,
Slutty
Wayne
just too many. too many to mention, but it's been like two things as really reinforced is one, it's just been great because it's just given me so much sort of sense of what's happening, and so much sense of, like how we're traveling, a really good sense of that, but also just a reminder, without looking forward only to Caulfield, is how the importance of having a proper training venue, because as soon as they went down to Casey, of course, they all dropped off. I mean, they don't let people in except around the fence, but down at Casey. But yeah, it was awesome. So I got a really great sense of the excitement and what we're trying to do and some of the players. And so huge thank you to Demonland regulars for all of the input. It's just made the summer, really.
Yeah, so anyone who is just a listener of this podcast and you don't visit Demonland, I always mention it a bit later. This is the best time of the year to be on Demonland. The track watching reports are fantastic. So, get on board. Each week I do put a call out to our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We love the feedback, and we do reward our loyal listeners who have taken that time to provide us with these 5-star reviews by giving them a shout out on the show. Now, we don't have any new reviews yet this year, but if you could just do us one favor, we don't ask for any money on this show. And the only thing we do ask for is your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And we do return the favor and give you a shout out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and you want to leave us feedback or post a comment or a question for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week, or just slide into our DMs. Don't worry, we won't read out your full name on the show. And in addition to being available on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, or any of your preferred podcasting apps, Demonland Podcast is also available on YouTube. Just search for Demonland Podcast to find our channel there. And if you want to chat with other Demon fans, as I said, and you've never been to demonland.com, head on over to there. You can chat with fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. And in addition to the amazing track reports that I talked about, you can post questions and comments for this show. Or if not, there's just a plethora of topics and threads discussing all things Demons related. So join up and join in on the conversation. And if you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of these topics that we're going to talk about, please give us a call on 0390163666. That's 0390163666. I'll answer. I'll put you on mute. I'll bring you on when there is a break in our conversation. If you don't mind, just hold off a little bit while we get through the first part of the show and then give us a call. If you're listening live, come join us in the chat room. Head on over to demonland.com/podcast. We are live every Monday. If you want to listen to the show live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at our usual time of 7:30.
And if you want to send money,
yeah, if you do,
please send money because
to bidman.com.
Be careful.
I'll spend it responsibly, I promise.
Bidman.com could be a naughty site. So.
Yeah, bidman.com. At 360 Hawks to Mr. Flag, I'll invest your money wisely.
Yes. Well, let's just
to miss the finals, I should say. Miss the Flag, bloody hell, miss the finals. Hawks to miss the finals.
So you think Hawks? We'll talk about that in our preview show that we're probably going to do in a couple of weeks. And yes, I won't promise anything because, we all know what happened, as I mentioned, with the season review show. Let's just quickly I'm going to do a quick match overview. In a promising preseason display, the Demons secured a convincing 46-point victory over the Kangaroos at Arden Street Oval in the sweltering heat, despite the absence of key players such as Max Gawn, Christian Petrarca, Jack Viney, Stephen May, Christian Salem, Ed Langdon, and Bailey Fritsch. The Demons showcased their depth and talent, outplaying the Kangaroos and winning, as I said, by 46 points. Central to the Melbourne's performance was the resurgence of midfielder Clayton Oliver. And after an injury-plagued 2024 season, Oliver demonstrated his elite capabilities, dominating the midfield with clean hands at stoppages and relentless efforts. His performance indicates a return, hopefully, to his All-Australian form, much to the delight of Demon fans. Up forward, Jacob Van Rooyen was a standout, leading the attack with 4 goals. His strong marking and accurate kicking provided a reliable target inside 50. And complementing him was new recruit Harry Sharp, who also contributed 4 goals in his first appearance since being traded from Brisbane. sharp speed and positioning added a new dimension to the D's forward line. The D's midfield was further bolstered by the impressive debut of first-round draft pick Harvey Langford, playing alongside seasoned players. Langford displayed composure and skill, suggesting he could be a valuable asset in the coming season. Cozzy Pickett also made a significant impact, splitting his time between the midfield and forward roles and showcasing his versatility and flair, booting 2 goals for the game. However, the match was not without concern. Late in the final term, young defender Andy Moniz-Wakefield suffered an ACL injury and had to be assisted off the ground. And devastatingly, Andy will miss the entirety of the 2025 season. And fellow defender Marty Hall left the ground early in the match and will undergo surgery on his hand and will be missing for an indeterminate amount of time at the moment. Overall, the Demons' performance in this practice match highlighted their depth and readiness for the upcoming season, with key players set to return and emerging talents stepping up. The D's appear poised for a strong 2025 campaign. How's that for positivity?
Excellent positivity.
Unheard of.
Very good.
It's the
I'm all realism this year. Realistic. That's going to be my key word.
Realistic.
Realistic. That's going to be my focus.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get straight into some, unless you got some, big man, you always have something you want to say about the game or the atmosphere or getting down to a local footy ground. And
it was great.
It
was great. I've wrote on Demonland a little while ago that there was a season I went with a friend, I think it was either 1978 or 1979, where we went, he barracked for North Melbourne and he was there Saturday as well. Which was a bit of a flashback. And one season we went to almost every game of footy or to a game of footy every week, and we alternated between D's games and Roos games. So consequently, I saw a bunch of games at Arden Street, and I've got a feeling it might have been the last year. When was the last year VFL footy was played at Arden Street, you reckon? 78, 79?
Pre-Demonland.
Pre-Demonland, yeah. So I reckon it was sometime back then. So it was quite a flashback. That gasometer was still there. So that, I think it was still there. It might have been my imagination. But yeah, and it was, the ground was in fantastic nick. Sharpie was excellent. He was the best Sharpie since I was at Arden Street in the late 70s. And I love the fact that we played with a red Sharon. Like, it just looked fantastic. The D's looked fantastic, like red and blue. That away jumper looks just phenomenal. I love it. It was terrific atmosphere. There's probably, 2,000-3,000 people, don't you reckon, George?
Yeah, about that number, yeah.
Yeah, so big. It was awesome, fantastic atmosphere. It was heartbreaking to see AMW go off, and also you could just see the disappointment. It looked like, I didn't actually see the incident, but you could just see the sort of body language of the trainers and everyone, that they're obviously concerned straight away that it was bad. And yeah, that's just a heartbreaker, isn't it? So that did put a bit of an edge on it. Just as an overall comment, it was really weird because I was standing next to the scoreboard, so I couldn't see the scoreboard. And I kept, so not really knowing what the score was, I kept thinking we were well up, but I watched the replay. And, it was basically level till 5 minutes into the last quarter. So, I think that's probably should be tempered a little bit about, wouldn't read too much into the 43 points. I'd be a bit worried if I was Roos fans. They just completely ran out of gas. So it's a good thing, our fitness looked good, or conversely, there looked bad, one of the two. But, I think it's worth keeping in mind that they were, they had all but two of their best 22 in that side. So they had a very strong sort of, for them, a very strong lineup. It was basically level until three-quarter time and even a bit into that final quarter. And I think we're going to have to, we'll talk about game plan next to that question, but, you're going to give up goals when you're that method of running hard from the back line. So, and we gave up quite a few, I thought, where we were caught out of position. So, but it was a terrific atmosphere, terrific day, and it was great to have footy back.
It was... I took away one big point out of this. I was absolutely appalled by the fact that this was a match simulation, and if North Melbourne are going to be using that as their game plan, they are in for some serious pain. during the season. We were able to open them up time and time again, and we would have done so even more. But the opportunities that they were giving us right up through the centre of the corridor of the ground was just incredible. They're playing a game style that was played 5 years ago, which was probably around when Clarkson was at the height of his powers, but kicking it around, chipping it around, and possession game is long gone. And the other thing that struck me is they don't play a zone defence, and they were just opened up. And I think our players on a number of occasions were just surprised by the opportunities that were right up the middle of the ground, and we moved it from one end of the ground to the other very freely and very easily, far too often.
Really only in that last quarter, though, when they just but you're right, like they weren't looking to move it quick, and we were pressing up super high. Like we were really defensively getting that back line of the defensive unit quite high. So when they did get through that, that's what I mean. Like that's that Collingwood conundrum. Once you get through that back sort of your defensive line, then there's space to run into, and they. That's what kept them in the game, their ability to get over the back. And it's still a bit of a work in progress for us to be able to defend that, I think. And but the other thing I thought was strange was that we didn't use the corridor, or they didn't use the corridor to the last quarter. But might be that it's a really small ground. When you get there and look at it, it really feels like a VFL ground.
Yeah. But their natural inclination was to chip it out to the wings every time. And when you're playing a team that's playing a whole team zone defence, all that matters is sets the defence up. And eventually the turnover came, and in that last quarter, the fact that they lost by nearly 8 goals is a fairly big indictment on what they're going to run into once the season proper starts, if they're going to play like that.
Particularly because I think really Simpkin and Wardlaw didn't play, did he?
Yeah, no.
So that's like, and I couldn't think anyone off. There probably might have been, but that's pretty. I think only 2 really that I could think of of their best 22 who wasn't in that side, and so it's. I'd be a bit nervous if I was a Roos fan about this rebuild. That's for sure.
All right, let's get into. By the way, I hadn't started the stream. This is really my preseason. Coming back, I hadn't had to do all these updates to all the programs I use. I didn't know passwords. My preseason is off to a shaky start, but hopefully, as we go on, I'll get better and better. Let's get into our listeners.
It's a practice match. A little cider.
Brushing the cobwebs off. I should have come back like AFL players are expected to be fit on day one. This is in the 70s and 80s where you came back.
Yeah, exactly.
Fit training. Well, that's what I've done. I'm back to the 70s and 80s. All right, let's get into this. We're about the 2025 game plan. So it might be a bit premature to talk about, given between the three of us, we've seen a handful of preseason training sessions and one practice match with a third of our best 22 out, but delightful play. Says, glad you all had a good break. It's certainly well-deserved. I'm excited for the first episode of the podcast this year. Based on the preseason track watching and the hit out against the Roos, do you think our capacity to execute the new, faster-moving game plan has improved compared to last season's difficulties? In spirit of Norm Smith adds, ditto. Was the overhandballing still sometimes our downfall? Yes, but looked less often. I thought we moved the ball much better. Cozzy was especially was very good. His run and overlap and delivery was a highlight. Please discuss. So I'm sure both of you do have something to say here. So B-Man followed by George. I'm going to talk about the game plan as you've sort of seen from training, from the game. What do you think it's going to look like?
Do indeed, and we'll tag. I'll get back to those questions, but I wanted to put this in somewhere. So this is probably the logical spot to do it. Is in the continuing sort of Demonland, Demons myth file, is this talk about our new game plan. It was doing my head in over summer that the review, we're going to look at a new game plan, and then in 2025 we're going to have a new game plan. And I was thinking I was in an alternate universe. Talk last season about the red and blueprint, and that was how I sort of structured my discussion about stats, which I'm going to look at something different this year. I'll go back to my idea that I had this time last year about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the curious in terms of when I do the stats file. But the way I described what we were trying to do last year was exactly the model that we try to put in place. You put up a post that I thought that just, I wrote on Demonland that I hope that the post or the interview that you put up with from in the Herald Sun from Goodwin puts the whole we are implementing a new game plan this season myth to bed once and for all. And I just want to read what Goody said about it. On the game plan, Goody said, but it won't be the same long down the line. This is not the quote, but it won't be the same long down the line tactics that drove Melbourne in 21-23 and returned for the second half of last year. In the most candid interview of his coaching career, Goodwin said he made an error zigzagging in game style last year, leaving the team confused. At the start of last season, the Demons changed up their ball movement in a bid to find the forward half efficiency it needed to be successful in September. In the 23 final series, the D's had 32 more inside 50s than the Pies and 8 more scoring shots than Carlton and lost both games in heartbreaking fashion. And Goodwin says, we would have had more inside 50s, but lose. That was the consistent theme at Melbourne, which is frustrating because we did a lot right. So you start to scratch for the 5% extra. So the Demons changed the game plan for 2024 and enjoyed a strong start, winning 7 of their first 9 games. But they were belted by a combined 127 points by West Coast and Fremantle in rounds 11-13. And that's when the Melbourne coaching staff blinked. To stop the bleeding on the scoreboard, Goodwin brought back key parts of the old 21 premiership game style after the round 15 mid-season bye. In hindsight, it was a mistake. In the middle part of the year, we got a little bit wonky, Goodwin said. We lost some personnel and we lost a few games really badly and we were totally uncompetitive and it was un-Melbourne-like. Belted by Freo by 92 points, lost to West Coast in Perth by 35 points. Similar to players, coaches are no different. We get nervous, we lose confidence. At that point, we asked ourselves, how do we help this team become more competitive? So we went back to a little bit of what we knew in hindsight. That was probably not the best way to go. If I had my time again, I would have continued down the path of exploring that different way of playing, and that is the learning. And that's what our summer's been about. Keep exploring, keep looking at different ways for better ways. So I say all of that by way of saying that, albeit for the wrong reason, I was correct last year about the method we were trying to put in place, that fast transition movement that the Pies really perfected in winning the flag in 23. And as we approach the finals, go back towards a more, contest based. Now we did that, but not for the reason perhaps I thought we might. And again, I think the reason I say all of that is because we are not implementing a new game plan this year. All we're trying to do is to implement the game plan that we spent most of last season and the previous pre-season trying to put in place. So I don't actually see much of a change in terms of what we're doing tactically. I think it's very similar last year. And if you remember when we had our this equivalent podcast last year, we talked about how noticeable it was, how much handballing they were doing at training and in the match sims and in the first practice match, how much handballing there was in that Richmond practice game where lots of forward handballs. It's again, we were doing that. That's what Spirit of Norm Smith is touching on when he says, was the over handballing still sometimes our downfall? We were clearly looking to do that. I think Goodwin was trying to do that last year and trying to sort of find ways to use hands but forward to get it, really long handballs. If you saw the game on Saturday, some of the handballs were 15, 20 metres forward into space. Clary did a couple of beauties to Cos back to Clary. There was a fantastic 1-2 that made my heart skip a beat at one stage. And so I think we're looking to implement that exact same game plan that we did last year at the first 2/3 of the season. So the question from Delightful Play, based on what we've seen and the hit out against the Roos, do you think our capacity to execute the I would scratch new, the faster moving game plan, that transition game plan has improved? I it's a bit early to tell whether it's improved. I think what has improved is the quality of players we've brought in. And our issue last year was we didn't have a Langford. We didn't have I was going to call him Francis, Xavier Francis. We don't have him this year either. We didn't have a Xavier Lindsay. We just didn't have enough good kicks in the side. Now, you don't, banging on about for ages. You don't need all of your 23 players in your side to be elite kicks. You need 5 or 6 elite kicks who can be relied upon not to turn the ball over, because with the transition game plan, you could see it on the weekend, George, couldn't you, how high up they pressed that defensive line? If you turn it over at the wing now, you're just going to get scored on every time. And so you just need to have both good quality kicks inside 50, and you need good quality kicks coming out of the back half, so you're not turning it over in dangerous spots. So to answer the question, I think we're in much better position to execute that game plan. A couple of reasons. One, this will be the second full pre-season that we've trained that exact same way. So you don't, particularly when we had such a concrete system before that from basically from 2019 all the way through to the end of 23, that's no mean feat to change that sort of system that's been drilled into the players for 4 or 5 pre-seasons. It's going to take time to change that up and implement a new game plan. So we've had a second year of ability to practice that game plan. We've brought in some quality players in terms of kicking skills. You can't expect Langford and, or even the best kicks will miss 30% of their targets, but Langford will be a really damaging kick. We saw on the weekend his ability to hit targets. The same with Xavier. His ability to kick to the forward's advantage I could cry watching it. The kick to Turner, getting it over the back of that contest, allowing Turner to mark the ball, is the sort of kick that, when you see it, it looks, like a bog standard AFL kick, but we just could not do those kicks regularly. So we've brought in more personnel who can kick and execute the game plan. And I think the key factor as well is fitness. So there's another question about that later, so I won't talk to it in detail now, but it's basically the game plan, as I talked about a lot last year. The issue, I reckon Goody's been really hard on himself there. I don't think he had any choice but to go to a slow up game plan and go backwards. Otherwise, we would have been destroyed. Not by every single game we played, we would have been beaten by 10 goals because we weren't fit enough. We just completely ran out of gas. And that transition model, is incredibly taxing offensively and defensively, because you turn it over, your back line has to sprint back to get back to defend that ball. Whereas in the older model, 3 of your back line are basically anchored and don't have to run anywhere, or not as far. So I think those factors, to Leiffel's question, mean that, we're much better positioned this year, much, much better positioned to execute that transition fast ball movement. The handball stuff, I think, I think it's something that Goody is trying to add to that game. Others did too last year. I really think it's an area that I certainly underestimated how the impact of poor handballing skills are. And, I think Xavier Lindsay, he's an excellent handballer, and he handballs out in front of players. To have Clary back using his hands was fantastic. Having Cos up around the ball more often with his kicking skills, that was a huge feature of the weekend, getting him near the ball because he's such a good kick. I think it's definitely positions us much better to be able to implement that game plan.
Mute, go George.
Yeah, haven't got much to add to that, but I do agree. I think Goody was being far too harsh on himself for having to change the game plan mid-year, but that was because of the selections that he had available. It's far too easy for people to forget who weren't in that side certainly from the middle of the season. You take out your Brayshaws, you take out your Petrarcas, you've got a one-handed Oliver, you've got numerous other players, and you're
running on fumes by the end of the season.
Yeah, and what are you bringing in? You're bringing in first-year players who've barely been introduced to the game plan in the first place, and they don't have the ability to execute it. So what do people see? They call it over handballing. It's not that at all. It's these kids who just aren't up to the levels that we've come to expect, certainly at the club. If you suddenly put into the side the Petrarcas, the Olivers, the people with the higher kicking skills as well, you don't see the overhand balling. It just doesn't happen. It becomes clean, it becomes efficient, and you get the results that you want. But we were hampered last year more so than people wanted, and as Binman rightly pointed out, if he'd stuck with that during the season, the fans would have erupted, absolutely erupted.
They did already.
Yeah,
they went nuts, finishing 14th, only 2 games out of, two games out of the 8?
Yeah.
And so, he was on a hiding to nothing. So
yeah. You've only got to look at the games that we won. They're all in the first half of the season. Second half of the season, it fell away simply because we didn't have the personnel. And that's the story of the last three years at least. As soon as you lose the personnel that are capable of delivering, and it applies to pretty well every side, you will drop off.
And particularly if you haven't got your fitness right. Like, that's the keys. Like, injury and fitness. It's never been more, apparent that they're the 2 key factors in footy these days.
And as Binman has said, you never see it mentioned in the media.
No.
Never.
Not even in the. Well, it's interesting because have you watched the replay? Either of you guys watched the replay of this game?
No.
I've watched a quarter and a half.
I'd really, really recommend watching it for one reason only. Multiple reasons, but one reason is Benny Brown is commentating, and he's really thoughtful. Like, it was just a joy to hear him, and I'm not sure who the other fellow was, Hargraves or something. He wasn't bad either, but for once, like, it was, actually I learnt a lot of things from the commentators, and that's what you want from commentators. And he talked about exactly that, George, about the it's a bit of a worry that North of compounded, because right before that he said, look, North have been really focused on keeping their shape right to the end of games. The result's not going to be so important. It's about keeping their structures. And right after he said that, basically they fell apart. And later on he said, well, it's a bit of a concern because it's it looked a fitness issue.
Yeah, look, it could have been a bit of a fitness issue. They were the game style they were playing. I think made them spent in that heat as well. That all chipping around and trying to quick chip to make some space. They were absolutely spent by the end.
But just on game plan, it probably would be unfair not to at least credit some of that to the D's structure and having our systems, and like George noted, the sort of that zone and having them well shaped, because that's more about system than personnel. And it felt like that at the ground a bit, is that like the Roos had their best team in playing against probably, arguably 10 to 11, even 12 of our best 22 not playing. And it felt a bit like their best versus our system. And our system, was up.
That was the pleasing thing from our perspective, that we had so many of our core players out. How many players were out? At least 8 or 9 best 22 players. You take them out and our system still held up, albeit it's early in the year, so it's all fresh with everyone, but that's a good sign.
And we had Fritter playing in Turner's jumper, or was it Turner playing in
Turner and Fritter's? Yeah.
So I'm not sure if he doesn't have a red number 10 Guernsey that fits him. Maybe they've still got Gus's and it just doesn't fit him. But
it was interesting, Ben, man, when you're talking about the high press at one stage, I saw JVR tackle Larkey.
Yeah.
That's how far up the ground. One full forward's tackling the other full forward. So
was he not in ruck at that stage?
No.
I remember seeing
there was.
He'd come up the ground and tackled Larkey as Larkey sort of came out to the centre half forward type position. But that's the sort of pressure we were providing as a team.
And how good was it seeing JVR have a good run at it and one out and marking the red Sharon and not rucking too much?
Yeah.
I know we'll get to that.
Well, we'll talk about rucking, because I'm a bit worried that he will be having to still ruck, and we'll talk about that actually right now, because Jane02 says, so excited that the podcast is back. Cannot tell you how much I've missed you all. Well, thanks, Jane. I just listened to Troy Chaplin's post-match interview. He insinuated that Max might get managed this season. As our spiritual leader, what do you think about this? We play better when Max is on the ground, but I understand he's not getting any younger so may need a break here and there. Is Campbell up to replacing Max in this instance, or will they just rotate the rucking duties? I'm not keen on JVR playing ruck. Prefer to see him stay down on the forward line. What does the panel think? Looking forward to this season, and I'm quietly confident we have what it takes this year to get the job done. Go D's. So let's talk about Tom Campbell's game on Saturday. I thought he was solid. Nothing flashy, but he's very serviceable. He was up against two rucks for most of the game. In brutal heat, mind you. And you've got to give him credit for holding his own. He's a big unit. He uses his strength well, and he's certainly not easy to move. I actually caught up with Max at just before Christmas, and I believe it was Tom who was the one that was responsible for crushing Max's larynx. And Max told me at the time that he's bloody strong and that he really makes you earn every possession at training. So there's no doubt about it. He's got that physicality. He's good hands. He's decent kick. Even hit the scoreboard with a goal. So you take that every day of the week from a ruckman. And I guess here's the bigger question: are we actually going to play two traditional rucks in the game? History probably says not. Is Max going to get rested or managed at times? And we've floated that before. And even when we did have Grundy, it only happened when. As in Max getting managed, it only happened when Max was injured. And I've got to say, I'm not sold on JVR, as we've talked about all year, doing a rucking around the ground while Max is on the bench, running up and down the ground for 5 to 8 minutes a quarter, and then expecting him to slot back into the forward line. It's a big ask, and it's not doing his forward game any favours. And I guess that's why we went for Aidan Johnson, and he's meant to fill that forward ruck role. In reality, we haven't seen enough of him yet to know if he's up to AFL level. He might need to prove himself at Casey first, and you guys can talk about what you thought of his game as well. So, George, what do you reckon? How do we manage backs? What's the best approach with our backup ruck options this year?
I think for the first time since 2021, we've got some serious options available to us after we lost both Majak Dor and Luke Jackson. In the ruck, we've been living on the smell of an oily rag, hoping that Max won't get injured or hurt or run out of steam during the year, and we've been badly caught out a couple of times now with that. But particularly having watched Campbell in pre-season, and particularly in this game, he is more than capable of holding his own. And all the questions that were posed by Jane O2 are exactly what the coaches will be facing at the moment. We've got options all of a sudden. He's big. He's difficult to move. He was up against Tristan Sherry, who's North's big unit as well. And quite frankly, I reckon he beat him overall. It's not a pantsing by any stretch, but what I really liked was his ability to use his strength to palm the ball out. It's been a long time since I've seen ruckman palming out, because they're usually matched up pretty evenly. But he was able to place the ball beautifully a number of times straight into the path of our players in the midfield. But the other thing that really impressed me was not just he went forward and kicked a goal, but he provided a couple of opportunities for others who did kick goals, simply because he just is immovable in that. I think Sharp's first goal came from because Campbell had got the ball, brought it to ground, picked it up off the ground, and got it out to Sharp, who snaps it. And
that's what I was going to say. He bent down, picked it up, and handballed it out straight to Sharp. That was
So it's too easy for people to look at, Sharp scored the goal. No, the work was done by Campbell, and this is exactly what we've needed for the last couple of years. So I don't know what the coaches are going to do. I suspect that at some stage we will be able to rest Max, that we've been crying out in certain circumstances over the last couple of years. Because we do have for the first time in those years, we do have another option, and more importantly, like Andy said, we don't have to use JVR trying to go up against some of the best rucks in the competition and then go back and play full forward. It's not surprising that his output drops in those circumstances. It's going to be far more threatening for us with JVR sitting in the goal square, doing what he does best. The other thing
Yeah, but that doesn't solve, just before you go on with that doesn't solve the JVR question, because they're most likely not going to play Max and Campbell at the same time. I can't see that happening.
We
Maybe
don't.
they will. We'll see. We'll see what
we don't
happens
know.
in the next
Yeah,
few
we don't know that,
weeks.
but we've
But
got the option. Yeah,
we do have the option. But if they don't,
Yeah.
who is that backup? Who is the backup ruck for those 8 minutes, 5 minutes at the end of quarters? We don't know what's going to happen with Johnson yet. I like what I've seen, but whether he's getting a regular gig, if he is in, he's probably the one doing that backup ruck that we're talking about. But we don't know yet whether he's going to get in.
Yeah, again, I was impressed with Johnson. In that he took over the rucking duties in the last quarter in this sim. Again, he's a big unit. He's aggressive.
Yeah.
We didn't get, because he rucked the whole quarter. We didn't get to see the forward craft. So, but like I said, the good thing is we've got options now, and the coaches have got options. We don't want to be in the position that we've been in the last couple of years of Max being broken effectively, or trying to get back from an injury or something 3/4 of the way through the season. The effect on the team is quite traumatic. But if we've got players who can hold their own, and we don't have the situation like we did in Fremantle, where we had Petty and JVR as our first and second rucks, we've got better options now, and that's the really pleasing and promising aspect of this.
Yeah, I just don't know what's going to happen.
Neither do I.
Whether we're going to play two rucks, because if we're not playing two rucks and Aidan Johnson's not in yet, because I do think he'll probably have to prove his forward craft at Casey, unless we see him play as a forward in Freo, because Max is likely to play. And yeah, I just don't want JVR rucking. And if it's just Max and JVR in the team, I think JVR's rucking, and I don't want to see that. But hopefully,
I reckon you're underselling his game a bit, Andy. I thought he was just about our best player. He was awesome, and I was Campbell. I thought he was close to our best on ground. Like, he was in that heat. He looks incredibly fit, but he never shirked a contest, and he flushed that kick from 40 metres out. That it was a beautiful bit of play. He was straight up the middle and hit him sort of 40 metres out, and it never deviated. It was super windy. If you, just as a heads up for anyone who has watched the replay, wasn't at the ground, it was crazy windy, and it wasn't just sort of windy, it was gusty. So it was gusting all over the place. So
and no one could read the ball that went over their head every time. Both teams.
JVR did it wasn't too bad, but yeah, Jefferson, ball bugger, he looked like, I would have thought he'd played enough of windy VFL grounds to have an advantage almost. And but it was really windy. But I was seriously impressed. I would have thought before the game, there's no chance ever that they'll play two of them again. But, maybe it's like there'll be, I look, the fitness stuff's interesting. I don't have enough knowledge or around the fitness stuff to say, well, do you need to rest a player like Gawn from a physical perspective? But I reckon there's something to be said for the mental perspective of resting Gawn, is even if it's to keep him fresh mentally and to keep him on the edge, but also you don't want to get into a situation where, like where Campbell, you want to run him in the seniors, have some games in the seniors. So whether the two of them could play together, maybe there's some games where you could do it. I was thinking about it on the weekend, is could you not do something like essentially have as many good runners as you can in the side? I was looking at Tom Mack's number. He was 96% of the time last year he was on the ground, time on ground. If you could have, a few of those players who are doing close to 100% game time, could you not sort of use your ruckman off the bench almost? Wasn't it one of you guys were talking about, I'd completely forgotten this, there was maybe a comment on Demoland somewhere that there was talk a few years ago about having a fifth interchange, and then the ruck could be used in that role. But is it possible that you could have your ruckman as on the bench, and basically Max swaps on and off the bench, and you use three runners to cover that? Maybe it's not with the amount of kilometres everyone's running, but look, I thought he was seriously impressive. It's hard to see them both playing, only because Goody's just not done it. Aidan Johnson, I thought his effort was fantastic, and so his sort of ability to be aggressive at the ball, all of that was on show. But we didn't see his forward craft. But having said that, he's at Werribee, he was a forward very occasional ruckman, but he was more a forward than he was a ruckman at Werribee. So you'd hope that he's got, I think he kicked 30-odd goals in his last season at Werribee. So, it'll be interesting, though, to see what they do. I mean, JVR did do a bit of rucking in this game at one point. But, yeah, I'm with you both. I think I really rate JVR's ruck craft, but I'd love for another couple of seasons for him not to have to do any more than occasional run on the ball, because you just want him as his tank completely full all the time and marauding around inside 50, and let him sort of to get his craft down forward, down pat. It'll be that's a really interesting wait and see. Coming into the game, I would have thought no way, but maybe you could play them both and he could be like a permanent tall forward, Campbell, that does swap on ball with Maxi.
All right, let's get into the next one. Mandalorian says, I was thrilled that we landed Harvey Langford a pick six. A friend of mine, deeply involved in the under-18 competition and not a D's fans, believed that Harvey was good enough to be number one pick and could turn out to be the best recruit in his class. After attending a few training sessions over the break and hearing glowing reports from other Demonland track watchers over the summer, I was impressed with his physique, work rate, and overall use of the footy. He seems ready-made for the role, and I was confident he'd be playing early in the season. Having watched him on the weekend, I'm now convinced he'll feature in round one. We've discovered a real gem. Welcome back, and here's to an exciting year of podcasting. Go D's. It's hard not to be super excited about Harvey Langford. I agree with everything the Mandalorian said. He's going to be a very, very special player for us. My books, he's an absolute lock for round one. B-Man, what are your thoughts on Harvey Langford's 19 possessions and 5 marks, as well as his booming left foot kick?
All the time I barrack for the Ds, I don't reckon there's a player, a new draftee or a new player to the club that I'm ever been more confident will play in round one. In terms of not even Clary. Clary wasn't sort of in the physique that Langford was. He was amazing, Clary, when he right from the get-go, he was amazing, wasn't it? And I can see Langford having a similar impact. Corns, there was a post on Demonland about Corns and David King talking about overs and unders, how many games that we might win for the season. And one of Corns' questions was, I don't see where the improvement's coming from. I can name one where it's coming from. Number 19, the kid is going to instantly improve our side. And I can tell you one thing why he's going to improve it right from the get-go. One, he's got really elite footy IQ. You can see that watching live at the game. And it was on full show right in front of us where George and I were on the wing. He had a kick where he was free on the I guess it's the Kensington side wing, and he kicked sort of diagonally across the ground to pass. I forget who he passed it to, but it would have been at the top of the 50. But what was brilliant about it is the shape that he put on the ball. The shape went away from the player that he kicked to. So it was a diagonal kick that sort of shaped away, curved away, allowing the Melbourne player to run to where the ball was, as opposed to sitting it on his head and getting smashed. It was just an absolute it was a small thing, but it just said to me the kid's not only good, he's got good kicking skill, that's IQ, that's just pure footy IQ, and he's a big unit. He's 191 centimetres now, and I think one of the most exciting things I reckon that call about him, in years to come, looking back, that he'll be the pick of the draft, won't shock me at all, because he's got all of the physical attributes, but he's also seemingly got the psyche for it. He just wants to get better. He's but where he's really exciting, he's unlike a player like Wines or Horn Francis, or even Rowell's probably the best example, and even to an extent, what's the fella, the number one draft pick over in Perth, who's come back very big, Harley Reid, even like Harley Reid, is that those players are good straight away, but they're not going to get any physically bigger. So they're sort of I reckon their sort of ceiling is is not as high as a player like Langford, who's 191 centimetres now, and he will get bigger. He will put on a couple of centimetres before he stops growing. And as a point of comparison, the player he talked about most wanting to be like and most sort of basing his game on is Bontempelli. And you can see it, the way he moves, the way he plays, being a left footer, you can really see that that's a good comparison. Bont, albeit Bont was 6 months older when drafted than Langford was. He was 191 centimetres as well when he was drafted, and he's now 194 centimetres. So Langford's going to keep filling out, keep getting bigger, and he's going to be a double threat, a threat on the ball and a threat up forward. You've got to, at that sort of height, 191, 192 centimetres, putting in context, Fritter's 188 centimetres. So he's already 3 centimetres taller than Fritter and will get taller. It gives oppositions a real conundrum about what sort of play do you put on him when he rests. So I could see it basically waxing with Track. So 60% forward, 40% on ball, swapping with Track, who's 40% forward and 60% on board. There, he looks the goods.
He started the game out of the square.
Did he? I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't there for long, but I thought as soon as I saw that, I go, that's Track and Langford are going to be waxing in that position.
I had to laugh though, because I was thinking back to the 70s in Arden Street. I was full of 1970s memories, and he was running around with 19 on his back, and I thought to myself, Ray Biffin never looked as athletic as Harvey Langford did. So, yeah, he looks the absolute real deal.
The thing that's impressed me about him at training sessions is he's trained every session during the preseason for a rookie. And the other thing is that he's trained every session in the midfield.
Yeah,
he's playing against the best that we've got, playing with the best we've got, right from the very start. But the thing that I really noticed at one of the training sessions is his vision, his ability. He can not only get the ball because he's huge and he's got the strength and the power to do so. He knows where he's going to put the ball before he even gets it. There's only a couple of players in the side at the moment have got that sort of ability. Oliver does, Cozzy does.
Oliver's a really good comparison in that sense, I reckon.
This kid's got the same. And there was I don't know whether it was the same piece of play that you're referring to. He got the ball, marked the ball about centre half forward or just forward of centre half forward, and he looked one way, looked left, turned Comden, I think it was, inside out, and then walked around him and delivered the ball beautifully on the left foot to whoever was on the sort of deep in the forward pocket at that stage. Just completely opened up the whole defence.
Yeah.
It was just brilliant to watch. That's from a kid who's 18 or 19 years of age at the moment. So, yeah, he's going to be an absolute gun for us.
And he looked exactly right. He looked completely not he looked out of place, did he? He looked like he had been playing a lot of footy. And I think that's a really good point you make, George, about his sort of awareness and his footy IQ. There's a few comments on Demonland sort of questioning, is he too slow? Not is he too slow? More is a potential weakness his speed. And I think, well, one, it's a bit like kicking. You don't need all players to be fast. You just got to be, relative. You have to have players who are like sharp, who can cover the ground fast. So I think we're actually now starting to put that has been a weakness of ours, and I think we've addressed that pretty well. But it doesn't matter how fast you are and you've got that sort of footy IQ. You're where the ball is. So I really don't think it's, that's an issue. It's an area that he's not going to radically, improve in his pace. He might a little bit, but for me, that's the least of the challenges for him.
From one left footer to another, D-Minion says, great to have you guys back, although he may not have been as prolific as fellow draftee Langford. I was really impressed with Xavier Lindsay today. Since I'm based interstate and can't make it to training, I want to thank all the Demonland track watchers for vividly capturing the preseason sessions. Your updates make me feel like I'm right there at Gosh's paddock. And given that Lindsay started his preseason late due to post-season knee surgery, do you think he might be ready to play in round one or early in the season, or should we expect him later on and return to glory? Writes, great to have you back. I'm incredibly excited to have Xavier Lindsay in the team. He's not like for like, but he does remind me a little of Jack Gunston. So, George, what are your thoughts on Xavier Lindsay's game? And could we see him play earlier in the season, like we're likely to with Langford?
Is Xavier Lindsay on display in this game? Elite, absolutely elite kicking skills. He will be in the team as soon as possible. The question is, of course, that he really didn't start training until after New Year. Has he got enough miles under the belt? That'll come down to the conditioning staff and the training staff. Dearly love to see him there, but I can understand why they might leave him for a little bit longer. The AFL footy is pretty brutal on first-year players in particular. Don't expect him to necessarily play 20 games. We had high aspirations last year for Caleb Windsor until he hit the wall, and that's sort of pretty typical of what happens to first-year players. But once again, he is a seriously talented player, and he will fit beautifully into as a counter to Langford on one side, Langdon on one side, and Lindsay on the other side as a winger. Those are the sort of players that Bin Man's been calling out for years, and I think the fans will be very pleased when he does actually hit the G.
Another lefty too. Like now we've picked up another one today in Cully. Is it Cully?
Yeah.
He's stacking the side with lefties. He as much as I love Langford, I reckon the ceiling is equally high on XL. I just think he's got something about him. I can't recall if it was what I talked last year about drafting him. I watched about an hour of his footage on YouTube, and he oozes footy IQ, leadership, good culture. He was captain for the Power. I think he was Gippsland Power, wasn't he? He was captain. I think he was captain for country as well. Maybe vice captain. He makes good decisions with ball in hand, and he's sort of like he's bigger than you think he might be. He's quite wiry and strong. He's going to be really flexible how they use him. I see him as sort of half-back flank, maybe wing. And that kick that I mentioned before was the ability to have the vision to be able to go past the face of the goal, kick to the pocket from 40 metres out, but actually execute. The vision's one thing. I'm going to get it to Turner, who's over the back of that contest, but to execute it, I mean, I just don't know how many times over the years I've just pulled my hair out when we kick it to the defender's advantage, not the forward's advantage. And I just thought that was a special bit of, like a basic thing you expect. I reckon the Gunston comparison's a really good one because Gunston is also sneaky big and strong and smooth mover. And I can actually see Lindsay coming, that's being that sort of leader as well. When you hear him speak, he's a really considered young man. So is Langford, actually. Seems really switched on. And I know Jason Taylor, he puts a huge emphasis in his selection on culture and kids, I guess, sort of personalities and their strength of character, and he rates both of them super high in that space. So, it's amazing, really. A top 5 pick who easily could have gone probably higher. A 13 who I think will end up in years' time, my feeling is, people go, how didn't he go higher? On top of that, we've got JVR. We've got, like this, probably more top 10 picks will be running around in round 1 if Windsor gets a Guernsey, or at some point this year than maybe ever in Melbourne, or certainly in the modern era.
Red Jacket writes, it's fantastic to see the potty back. Guys, I'm really excited about the upcoming season. When we traded for Harry Sharp, I must admit I felt a bit sceptical since I'm always cautious about players who haven't secured a spot in the top team. Considering we'll be losing Nibbler's contributions as a defensive half forward, do you think Sharp can fill that role? I was especially impressed when he kicked 4 goals on the forward flank. How do you see his role evolving, given that he can also play on the wing? And Say What writes, I was surprised how much of a small forward role Harry Sharp played in the practice match. Do you see him primarily as a small forward or a wing/half forward rotation? Now, Big Man, do I need to give you a few moments to compose yourself as we've brought up the loss of your favourite player? in Nibbler. Big man, what role do you see for Harry Sharp this season?
Who? Nibbler? For my sins, because I was so desperate for some footy, I watched a bit of the practice match, the Crows versus someone. I thought, geez, he turns it over a bit, Nibbler, doesn't he?
Now you're off. Now
And
you're
he's
off.
really slow. Like he kept on making, just kick the ball, Nibbler, move it on quickly. But he also ran them into the ground and was phenomenal. So but anyway, Nibbler's at another club now. So
who's the love child then, Bin Man?
Well, I'll tell you what. Who's my new on the bandwagon to protect is Tommy Mack. Is like people talking about we can't play four talls. Is there a question about that coming up or before? I can't recall.
No, are we talking forward line because isn't he a defender?
Yeah, he's a defender. Is that he's a lock for round one? And anyway, so Tommy Mack, people seem to be underestimating him. He's been fantastic this summer. But back to he's my new. You did ask who my new player was. The answer about Sharp is that based on what I saw on Saturday, he's just a fantastic replacement for Nibbler. Like honestly, and he kicks goals. Unlike Nibbler, God,
yes, that was my one criticism.
Yeah, I know.
When he kicked enough goals.
Well, I thought Sharp looked sharp, and he was terrific actually, and he did a lot of running. He was like he did up and ground. It was obvious because he kicked those goals, front and center. Good, good roving. One of which was. I'm guessing we'll talk about him at some stage, Jefferson. It was a brilliant pickup by half volley pickup by Jefferson. That was seriously a good bit of play, and the small forward was in the right spot. It was a terrible bit of defense though, because he was basically left alone. Two of his goals, he was completely left alone. Sharp. So to answer the question, I reckon he's. I was just going on, what I've seen at training and what people have said. So I had no real sort of marker as to what he was like. I didn't really see any of him. I couldn't recall his games at Lions, but I was super impressed with him on Saturday. And based on that, I could see him basically sort of coming straight in for Nibbler's spot. I don't know. What do you think?
You reckon half forward, that high half forward, I guess, if we call it.
Yeah.
Not wing. Because I thought he was.
Well, I think we're moving to a stage with footy, and there's some shifts happening. One is that I think we'll go with multiple high half forwards. That there won't be one player replacing Nibbler. He'll be one of them. Chandler will maybe play closer to goal. That's what Max Gawn said in an interview about with Cozzy going into the middle. Chandler will have to play closer to goal. That's the thinking at this stage. So I think they'll Billings, Sharp. Sparrow has been talked about playing the high half forward role, apparently. So I think they'll roll a few players there, even and so that sort of distinction between a wing and high half forward is sort of falling away a bit. You'll probably get some pure wingers, or even our most pure winger you mentioned before, Langdon. He's likely to be playing midfield, but so I think they'll roll a few players through it. Lindsay might play some wing, but yeah, so I don't think it'll be like a complete. They might move Sharp closer to goal as they need to, and but I did hear someone say that Sparrow's definitely been given a sort of more high half forward role, and he looked fantastic too, I thought. And I really hope they free him up to be a bit more aggressive, actually, and not just a defensive forward. I think he struggled with that last year. So, but yeah, I think Sharp is in our best 22. I think based on what I saw on the weekend, he was excellent.
So Ed Langdon didn't play on the weekend. We've heard from the club as well as from Dreamland Track Watchers reports that Lingers, mentioned is earmarked to play some more midfield minutes. And add to that, it's been reported Caleb Windsor's likely to play off the half-back line as a bit of a distributor. So we've brought in both Sharp and Lindsay, who both can play wings. You reckon Sharp's more likely to play up forward. What do you guys make of all that? You've started alluding to that, big man, about the wing and the half forwards sort of blending in. For years we had no wingmen at all. We were using flankers and fridge midfielders there. Then we had two very good premiership wingmen, famously started the Wingers Club. Now we've got a bevy of players that can potentially play a range, as you mentioned, Big Man, a range of positions from half back to half forward and on the wing. So I guess it's a great thing to have. George, you want to add anything to that?
No, that's exactly the nice situation that we find ourselves in. That Binman's right. The pure winger role has probably changed. If you look at Langton, the way he plays from goal square to goal square, basically, and that's the sort of player that I think is that sort of type of player is what we'll see more in the future, and that's why we've suddenly got options. Sharp was certainly playing that type of role in this game. Lindsay was playing that sort of role. Even Woden, when he was playing,
that's true.
Was doing the same sort of thing. I think our coaches in this game, this was a genuine match simulation. Let's find out what these individual players can do, and then we'll look at it when we get to probably the first time we'll see it in the Fremantle game about who fits in best into the role. So we've now got the options with Billings as well. I think the other three are far better players than Billings. But we've got the options. When Hunter wasn't available last year and Caleb Windsor got injured, we had no one. Now all of a sudden we've got four players at least that can fit into the role of winger. But I think ultimately
Bowie's took Bowie push up the ground a bit. And
it'll be interesting with Bowie.
Now the AMW's out.
I think Bowie will be. The fact that he was even in this game was doing all the kickouts. I think.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
That small backman role, I think he'll be almost pushed back a little bit from what he has previously. So, this is all about giving ourselves options, and we've got some options now at last, which was much better than what we finished up with last year. Yeah.
And I think you make a good point, George, is that I think the way the footy's evolving with that transition game is that it's really noticeable watching live when you're at that ground like that and you can see the players so close up, is that they're evolved like that physique that I've been talking about the last couple of seasons, comparing them to 400-metre runners. They're looking more like 400-metre runners who have been doing sprint training now. Like they're sort of strong, but still, they're covering heaps of ground fast. And I think teams are needing to have 6 or 7 of such players, almost like thinking of them like the old school utility, who play in different in one of the positions, and one of their key functions is to be able to run 12, 13 kilometres a game. Most of that striding speed and a good clip, and getting up and back on defence. And it's interesting you mentioned Wowie. He looks in really, really good nick, and I'm not sold on Wowie. Still not sold really, but he looks like he's going to give himself his every chance to make it, because he looked in fantastic nick, I thought, and did a lot of that gut running, and those players are really increasingly super important footy. Brown talked about it about how we're going to cover Nibbler, and it sort of implied it's going to be hard to cover it. Because how valuable that high half forward role is and how undervalued it is. I think we're moving past it. I think people now are recognising how important that role is.
The news of Andy Menzies-Wakefield's ACL injury, it wasn't just an ACL. I think he did the ACL, the PCL and the MCL. But it's just devastating, and even more so given it was sustained in the dying minutes of the match. And what says, while McAdam and Menzies-Wakefield weren't necessarily starting 22, how will their respective positional roles be covered? And DG says, great that you're back in 2025. We know how important injuries and fitness are to the result in the modern game. How do you think we stack up against opposition in this regard at this stage of the year? I guess that's a difficult question to answer, particularly. I don't pay too much attention to how other teams are tracking at this time of the year. Perhaps one of you guys are better placed to answer that one. But first, Andy Menzies-Wakefield, Beer Man, it's just devastating. Must be soul-crushing for Andy, and also McAdam as well, who he has struggled with injuries over the past 2 seasons, and to miss the entirety of this season, it's devastating.
Oh, it is, isn't it? And like Jagger Smith as well. Like I hate it. Like I just hate it. It's hard not to be devastated. Felt really, when I heard it was an ACL, I didn't, at the ground I was thinking, hopefully maybe it's an ankle, or, but but they were pretty quick afterwards. Chaplin was interviewed straight afterwards and said he thinks it's an ACL. So I'm guessing they heard the telltale pop sound that I hear so much about, that it sounds awful. It really is devastating. And I was just thinking about him, like he got in for a couple of games, he's just re-signed or, extended his contract. He's doing he's had a great pre-season, and to think it's a full another 12 months to get back to where he was, even like it's not even, he'll be behind the 8 ball at the beginning of next season. And it's just so cruel, isn't it? It's just such a cruel sport, and injuries are always cruel. So, but and the ditto for McAdam, I felt just devastated for McAdam too. And I really, really dislike the sort of talk about, he's a bust and McAdam. I mean, injuries happen. He had a great preseason by all accounts, was in good headspace. It just so devastating for him as well. Hopefully those two will be able to rehab together. Maybe that's one, that's an awful silver lining in something there. So hopefully they'll be able to support each other. And it was devastating on another level. Both of those players out are really bad outs, because I actually think McAdam would have come in for Cos round 1 potentially and had his chance to cement his position while Cos was away. And I actually think AMW is a really important out in terms of our structure, because as I've talked about a lot, we haven't had a decent, really good small defender to lock down those sort of Waitman types or even the smaller sort of crumbing forwards since Jets in 2018. That's the last time where I reckon we had a real elite, like in the sort of level of Quaynor. I reckon Quaynor's the best in the AFL at playing that lockdown small defender role, and it's been our Achilles heel. Like, we've had a number of Brisbane always cut us up with their small forwards. Freo, ditto. It's a position we've struggled to fill. So you're probably right, George, that it might mean that Bowie's going to have to go back, but I don't think he's so great one-on-one. You need someone who's disciplined and, and I reckon AMW was that player. And so he was terrific in that game. And for it to happen, you may not have noticed this I didn't realise until, if you haven't watched the replay, they rolled straight into the second scenario. It happened in literally the last 30 seconds of the game. And it was a pretty unpleasant sort of tackle too, unnecessarily rough for a practice game. Yeah, so awful. It's not going to be helpful at all in terms of filling. I don't know who comes in. You're right, Bowie might go back. McVie being out was that player who was taking the Camerons, and so that's a bit of an out as well. There's some talk of Seston's been training with the back half, so he might be able to, but he hasn't got the leg speed, I think, of someone like an AMW. He's a bit slow. So Howes is a bit too tall for that, and he doesn't, so it takes a particular, that's why, I think it remains still a gap for us, unfortunately, and I think that's an opportunity that he would have filled it. To the question of the fitness, that's like a Dorothy Dixer, because as DJ says, of course, as I've said it as well, that's just critical. How do we stack up against our opposition in this regard at this stage of the year? That's a really great question. And my homework before the start of the year, before round 1, is that I'm going to create a ladder of fitness, basically, one for my own purposes to inform my punting, really, but also to try and get a more realistic gauge on, given, my sort of blind thing last year was saying that fitness is critical, but then expecting us to be able, we had a terrible pre-season last year compared to this year. Thinking that we'd be able to get hopefully some magic to get over the top of it. So this year I'm trying to recalibrate to sort of get a much better sense of how well to do some grading like an A and do a ladder. And so I have been tracking as the other clubs and saving articles about how they're going. I'm trying to sort of think about the criteria. So it'd be something like 80% of the players have done 80% of the sessions, and I can sort of work that out via the track watching stuff, the injuries, the type of injuries, the timing of the injuries. Like pre-Christmas injuries are different to post-Christmas because they get most of their big kilometres in before Christmas. So a player like Curnow for Carlton, he's re-injured himself, but the problem for him, and say Nick Dacos is a better example, he had plantar fascia before Christmas, so he wouldn't have been able to do bugger all running. He'll never get to his best optimal fitness this year. Dacos, no chance. So, looking at other teams, and if I was to do a grading at Christmas time, we were in A probably at that point. And it's been a horror show injury-wise, really, it has to be said, since Christmas, hasn't it, since we've come back from break. But we're far from the only team that is in this position. Like Carlton have just, Walsh is out, Curno's out to probably round 3 or 4. He will never get to his optimal level. Carlton, so on a ladder where I've looked at it at the moment, and I'll get this in more sort of detail and get some better sort of criteria, if you like, is the clubs that are travelling really well fitness-wise, Brisbane and Geelong. Both of them have had fantastic pre-seasons, very few injuries, no major ones. Most of their players got through their block of pre-season training. We were up in that top grade, but we're sort of in that, I reckon, the 4th or 5th, so it's still not too bad. But then there are a bunch of clubs that are doing terribly. Collingwood is one of them. Hawthorn had a terrible pre-season in terms of injury, and they'll have the first year that compressed pre-season because they went into the finals last year. Carlton have had a shocker. Saints have had a shocker. West Coast, forget. I mean, not that they're a threat. Forget it. West Coast are in a basket case. Harley Reid's come back not in shape at all. He looks completely overweight, and there's talk over in the West about his attitude, and they've just had another serious injury plus some other sort of incident, a couple of incidents. So I would say we're in the top third for pre-season so far in terms of how well it's travelling. We've really only, Melksham is, Hammy, we haven't got any of the sort of situation we last year where we had so many players who couldn't do, Clary is being a good example. As Chaplin said, Clary didn't start training till the new year last year. He's already so far ahead of where he was last year. He's going to be like a new recruit.
Yep, fantastic. Love to hear it. We'll talk about Cozzy. Radelaide says, so good to have the podcast back for another season. I thought Cozzy had a solid game against North, and I was super impressed with the ferocity of his tackling in the Indigenous All-Star game. We're sorely going to miss his now extended cameos in the guts, as well as his offensive and defensive output in the forward 50. How are we going to cover him in the first 3 rounds? George, there's simply no replacing Cozzy, so how are we going to cover him in that?
That was exactly going to be my answer. We cannot replace Cozzy. He is such a good player. For those who haven't been to the training sessions pre-season, he was spending the majority of the time actually in the midfield. I think he was going to be not just cameos, he was going to be spending a lot more time in there, and around the ball he's frighteningly good, as we saw in this simulation game. He just knows where to go, where the ball's going to go, and he just seems to be where it goes before anybody else knows. So I don't think you just can't replace that sort of quality. But again, in this match simulation, you're starting to get an idea about who's going to be playing in the midfield. Langford, we think he's going to be in the first round, best 22. Sparrow's spending more time in there. Even Chandler was spending more time in this particular game. So they're trying all sorts of options at the moment. The good thing is really, apart from Cozzy in the midfield, we've got Petrarca back, we've got Oliver back, we've got Viney back, of course, coming back. We've got the options for those first couple of games, but you just can't replace that type of flair. It just doesn't exist. So we will cover the roles sufficiently, but we can't cover the class.
Well, let's talk about depth, because that's we're talking about covering. D Old Fart says, I love the return of the potty, guys. I hope you're all refreshed and ready to go in a year that will tell us a great deal about our new look Ds. I thought there were plenty of positives to take away from the match sim versus North, but perhaps the greatest of all was the competition we seem likely to have for senior spots across all lines. To me, the scope seems very much greater than it did last year. What do the panel think, and how crucial will it be to our chances in 2025? So, yeah, batting deep is always crucial to a team's success. Injuries are going to occur. It's just simply not something you can fully plan for. However, I think this season I'm certainly more confident that we have the depth in our team, and I know that it's just a practice match against a young team who has spent the better part of the last 5 years or so at the bottom. But they played with a pretty strong team with a few notable absentees. You asked about it before. Big man, I've got a note. Simpkin, Fisher, Wardlow, Dersma, they seem to be the names that stuck out to me. But I think we had more quantity and quality missing, and we still won by 40 odd points, albeit it is in a practice match. So, big man, how crucial is depth, and do you think we have more of it this season than we have in the last couple of years?
Yeah, though yes is the short answer, but that's because we've brought in a top 5 pick, we've brought in a 13 pick. We've got, that's what I was saying before, is that, and some of those players that last year, like Windsor, albeit he's had that foot infection, another preseason under his belt. JVR is another preseason under his belt. People forget, or it's easy to forget, that Turner, this is only his 3rd AFL preseason, and I'll add another sort of thing about that. Only his first AFL preseason where he's trained as a forward for the entire preseason. He's my prediction for a breakout player this year. So we've got a whole raft of younger players who will just improve by the fact that they're in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th year of AFL footy. I think, the reason I think it's a bit of a furphy is that if we get 4 or 5, 6 key injuries, it doesn't really matter how much your depth is of course it's, where a player like, for instance, Campbell being able to come in and cover for Gawn, that's critical. I actually think he's a really big piece of the puzzle. And I was talking to George about this at the weekend, as much as anything, because when he's playing at Casey, we really missed Dorr when Dorr went out of the side, because it impacted our ability to practice our setups at Casey, that we players who moved from Casey to Melbourne. I reckon that's as big a factor as the depth issue, is that we struggled to implement the sort of senior systems in the VFL, if that makes sense, in large part because we didn't have a decent ruckman. That will change. So short answer is, yeah, I think our depth's better. I just don't think it's as big a factor as what people sort of tend to think to a degree. If we get 6 or 7 injuries, we're in trouble. So, but we've got quality across the line. I think we've got our list is as strong as I can recall it, in a long time. Certainly, it's one of the strongest lists that I can recall in the whole time I've barracked for Melbourne. Just think of how many in our best 22. At some point this year, we'll have what about first rounders? Say Jefferson was a first rounder. Let's say Jefferson plays JVR. So we've got JVR, Jefferson, Windsor, Colt, Lindsay, Langford, Maxi, not Maxi, Viney, Clary, Petrarca. I think Langford was 11. Billings was, he might even get a gig. He was stopped. Yeah. Looking at, that's just off the top of my head, probably there's some more. That's 10, 12 first rounders. There's no comparable time in my supporting life where, we've had that sort of quality. So, fitness and injury are the keys to that. But yeah, I think we're in good shape list-wise, that's for sure.
So let's get sticking to the theme of depth. Bigfoot says, great to have you boys back for another stellar season of podcasting. We had a plethora of notable absentees for the match against North, who will no doubt, if fit, be available for the Freo practice match and round 1. They are as follows. Caleb Windsor, Jack Viney, Stephen May, Christian Salem, Christian Petrarca, Charlie Spargo, Max Gawn, Ed Langdon, and Bailey Fritsch. Other notable absentees are Judd McVie, hamstring, Colton Tolstrup, bone stress, Jake Melksham, hamstring, who all will miss the early parts of the season. Andy Moniz, Wakefield, ACL, and Shane McAdam, Achilles are out for the season, and we're waiting on news about Marty Horse hand injury. He'll likely miss a number of weeks. Of the players that were absent for the Kangaroos match sim and are fit and likely to play round 1, who will they be replacing in the side that took on North? So we'll do this one a little bit differently. I'll rattle off one by one our notable absentees from the Kangaroos match, who are all by accounts fit, will be fit for round one, and the best 22 players. I won't consider the guys that aren't fit for round one, McVie, Melksham, Tolstrup. So the list of players, all things being equal, playing round one. So you tell me who they're replacing in this team that played this week. So B-Man and then George. So Stephen May, who's he coming in?
He'll come in for Hoare/Adams.
George, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm a bit all at sea with this because this was a match sim.
But it doesn't matter. Like these guys are all coming in, so someone's coming.
But we were trying out multiple people in multiple positions, and so
come on, George, and he's come up with a new thing, and you're
making it difficult for me. All right, George,
I know. Yeah, I'm out. No one replaces Stephen May.
No, Stephen May, you've got replacement dyslexia. He's replacing someone else.
These guys are coming in.
If I say T-Mac, Bin Man will go off his tree.
Yeah, that's true. Don't say T-Mac. Yeah. All right, I'll take that on notice. T-Mac.
Well, that's an interesting thing, actually, because, all right, forget Marty Hall. So May comes in. You got May, Lever, Petty, and T-Mac. Can we play with these four talls? Was that what you were alluding to before, B-Man?
Yeah, I've had having this debate on Demonland.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
We just did on the weekend, for God's sake, and it go back to round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4 of last season when we were implementing the same game plan, I might add, fast transition. They did all play together. So at one point we had Hoare, T-Mac, Lever and May. 4 talls. Then we had Tomlinson. In opening round, we had Tomlinson, I think it was Hoare, Lever, May, and Howes. And so we had at one point,
both Howes and Hoare play
Howes
a bit
191 centimetres.
And how tall are the other? Petty?
Well, Petty is T-Mac's the tallest of those lot, but the point is that we multiple times under Goody, heaps of times, at least half of the season last year, we ran with 4 genuine talls.
So do you think round 1, May, Lever, T-Mac and Petty will all be playing in defence together?
100%. I would be shocked if I would fair dinkum. I'll put my house on it. T-Mac will be in round 1 and he'll be in defence. He was our best defender, arguably, last year. He's had his best preseason just about ever. First season in about 3 years, he hasn't had any foot issues. If you look at him, especially when you look at him like at the opportunity at Arden Street, he is in unbelievable nick. Now he's not got any faster, and he's not the most agile in terms of his turning circle, but he is in as good a nick as he has been at any point in his career, and he is a lock for round 1. So absolutely, they'll play. Those 4 players will line up in round 1. I will be shocked if they're not.
I thought T-Mac's disposal was very good as well.
His disposal is elite. He's brilliant by foot. He's reliable. He hits targets. And in footy, that's what I keep saying, in footy these days, that 20 to 30 metre kick that every AFL player should be able to hit, they're the ones that when you don't hit, everyone's out of position because everyone has to play as if that kick's going to be hit. That's the one that May misses all the time. It's the one that Lever misses all the time. Tommy Mack does not miss those kicks. It's one of the key reasons he's a lock. He's also a lock because he does 96% of last season, 96.7% or 96.9% time on ground last year, Tommy Mack, which means Lever was only 87%. That's not possible for Lever to go off the ground for that length if you're not got Tommy Mack doing 96%. Same with May. He's around the mid-80s as well. So, those 4 players, I will be shocked if they're not playing together.
I thought Petty, how good was it seeing Petty, seeing Petty back in defence in his premiership position?
Yeah. But the other thing you've got to keep in mind is that we've lost Andy Moniz Wakefield. We may not have Caleb Windsor. We haven't got McVie. Why wouldn't you leave a T-Mac in the side or a Petty? Why wouldn't you run 4 talls? Because your next option becomes Howes. You're going to have T-Mac drop T-Mac out ahead of Howes.
No, I think Howes and T-Mac are fighting for the same spot, and T-Mac is miles ahead of Howes.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed.
And the other thing about footy that's interesting is you can forget pack marks now. Like they're just like total icing on the cake. And it's all about both, the forwards and the defenders bringing the ball to ground. And T-Mac comes in third man into contests all the time and smashes them. That's why, teams run with tall defences, because they've got to smash contests and bring the ball to ground, and the same with forwards. So, that's all about stopping the opposition. I mean, it doesn't happen. How many contested marks are there up forward these days? There's bugger all.
Salem.
Who does he come in for from that Montes Wakefield?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Windsor, if fit.
That's an interesting one. Windsor. Well, Wowie.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a
Wowie is me.
All right.
This is not me, actually.
Well, maybe not a difficult one because I know who George is going to say. Langdon.
Langdon.
Who does Langdon come in for?
Yes.
Billings.
George, not getting this.
Billings. It's
Billings.
quick now.
That's
Billings,
clear.
whatever. You can't answer Billings for all of these, George. You can only go out once.
All right. This is an interesting one. Max.
Who does Max come in for? Well,
yeah.
Sharp.
Viney.
Well, on Max, will be fascinating, won't it? Who they select for Freo, and
Well, do you think they'll play both of them? Because
surely to goodness they'll give AJ a run to see if there's any chance of that forward chop out role. Forward with chopping out Maxi in the ruck role works. So surely they'll want to have a look at that.
And they'll have they got an extended bench for the practice match? I wouldn't be wanting to be playing Max for 4 quarters in any case. Give him a couple of quarters and that's it.
I'd rest him. Bloody hell.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even take him to Perth.
Yeah, that's interesting. Viney.
Cozzy. This game's easy.
Give you that one, Ben.
No, because there's someone coming up. Well, depends. I don't know if he's playing enough, but no, Petrarca.
Whoever Petrarca wants. So, he can. I think he's got that in his contract now. Petrarca can choose who comes into the team or not. So,
Fritsch, interesting.
Mm.
It is interesting.
Jefferson.
Jefferson. I sort of want to see.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Yeah. Jefferson, I can see Jefferson ultimately playing a similar role to Fritsch, like a leading forward type. And
Jefferson's going to have to go to Casey and earn his way
learn how to jump off the ground for a start.
Well, he was a bit better. I thought he's like we've talked about. He's not instinctive second. I think he's really improved in that space. So the jury's still out. Hasn't come back with a verdict yet on Jeffer. And
the other one, I'm not sure he's ready yet. Spargo, he would have just started full-time training. So
I think so. I read on Demonland that he did the full match sim though, didn't he? Were you there, George, when he played?
No.
I thought he did a match, at least one match sim where he played.
Surely his tank isn't.
Yeah,
he's
been running, hasn't he? Hasn't he been running?
Yeah, but only recently.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, he hasn't been running for an awful long time.
So
he's not coming in then. So why'd you choose him, Andy?
Well, I just had the notable things. That was my mistake. All right. Let's go. We'll do this one. Developing leaders. There's talk of Demons 858 says there is talk of more leadership being shared with the younger guys. Love the idea. JVR spoke impressively the other day, and I could see him being one of the ones that are given more opportunity to lead. Who else is in our developing leaders group? Dean a Kilt adds, I'm asking your thoughts on Demons leadership like Demons 1858. I'd really love to see transition to the next gen. Maxi is loved by everyone, arguably one of the best rucks of all time, and he's awesome with the media. And history says Max was the right leader in 2021. I listened to Michael Voss on the pod he called In the Arena. He was ruthless leading the Lions on their three-peat, a huge feat. Voss talked about the critical importance of really high standards. He was brutal game day once he crossed the white line. This is not about his coaching. Captain and coaching are different. Do you remember last season they'd mic'd up Max on a game day when he was injured? What struck me is how super nice Max was to all the players. Too nice. This and Track in his robust discussion saying the club let standards slide had me questioning if Max is the right leader now. From things I've heard, Vines is inspirational in his actions more than his words. Track and Rue and Chandler seem to have an edge about them. Love to hear your thoughts. Now, before I throw to George, just on a D's in a kilts comment about Max being too nice, there was an article in the Herald Sun on the weekend that said the following, and I quote, Gawn and Viney are the key to this resurgence as leaders. Gawn is a masterful media performer, and like Geelong coach Chris Scott, he defends his players to the hilt in public while challenging them in private. Both Viney and Gawn have nurtured Oliver and Petrarca, but also delivered the home truths when needed. So anyway, take what's written in the papers with a grain of salt. But granted, I'll concede that there might have been some standards that may have been let slide in reference to Track's concerns. Gawn and Viney, as leaders of the club, probably have to take some responsibility for that. So George and then Big Man, if you want to give your 2 cents, your thoughts on the current leadership and the next generation coming through.
Leadership is a really difficult area to research and understand. A lot of leadership is dependent upon the people that you have beneath you. You can't just come in with a aggressive, you use the example of Michael Voss. He could afford to be ruthless, aggressive, straight down the line because he had the right sort of players beneath him at that particular point of time, and they responded in that particular way. And don't forget, that was 20 years ago now. People are, the later generations are very different from what football used to be in terms of the way that people are expected to act. So you've got to use the right sort of leadership principles at different times, depending on who you're trying to get the message to. I'm always reminded of when Jordan Lewis first came to the club. What was that, 15 years ago now, I suppose? And he said something very similar to what Track said. It's about the standards that are being set amongst the players beneath. It's not just the leaders or the people who've been designated as captain or vice captain. It's what's happening amongst the group. And the really strong teams and the teams with the really strong cultures are the people who are the teams that don't need to be told what to do. They instinctively know it. They know what they've got to do to get the right results. And like Jordan Lewis did, and like Viney shows in every game, it's about what you show on the field. It's about what you show on the training track from week to week. So it's difficult for us to know because we're not the psychologists and we're not the people who are working within the club. But you do have to be careful because football clubs appoint captains and vice captains. Are they the best leaders? I don't know. We'll never know. There are very promising signs from even the latest recruits, as Binman mentioned. When you've got kids coming from the under-18s competition who are vice captains and captains at that level, they've already got good grounding in those areas. It's been recognised by others. So my answer to that would be it depends on the whole group, and the group that encourages themselves to be better players are the ones that will be successful rather than an individual sitting at the top making a directive.
Yeah, that's a really insightful comment about George, about the leaders need people to lead, don't they? They know, it doesn't matter how good a leader you are, and so it's an interesting critique of Maxi, I reckon. Sort of as I'd add to that comment that you need, if you think about Voss, that's a really good point, George. If you go back to that team, he had people like, Brown and
Black.
the Scott brothers and what was the
Ackermanis.
yeah, like that would have been a bit hardcore. What was the other fella in the middle? Simon Black,
Black, yeah.
like he had players around him who were hardened leaders or whatever. And I agree also that it seems like some of these younger fellas, both the new ones, but also Windsor last year, some of his leadership. But JVR has spoken about wanting to become a leader. Turner's been talking about wanting to become a leader. They talk a lot about being leaders in their units, in the back half, in the forward half, in the midfield. So I think that there's some good stuff there. But that conversation about Max is really interesting, and it's a bit like the sort of on a similar vein to you have to have the players around you to who can be led to a degree. I think Maxi probably hit his limit last year with all the rubbish that he had to deal with. He was the one who had to front the media half the time. Goody, I love Goody, but he's not the most natural media performer, whereas Max is. But he was the one who was out there trying to explain things away, and he would have had to swallow a fair bit of his own anger because he, if we can accept there was probably some degree of disharmony. It always is when teams are losing, and then that whole, if there was any sort of factions, there was stuff bubbling away, any of those sorts of things, he had to fix those. He had to mend fences. He had to keep things together. Maybe in that environment, you can't come in and be the hard, and strip through people. Maybe if more people are in better headspaces this year and are taking ownership and leadership more themselves, he can focus on his own game a little bit more and go, if need be, tear the strip, the paint off the walls if need be, although that's not really his style. So, I think that's a really good point about it's important who's around him. And on Maxi, I think he's the best captain in my lifetime at Melbourne in terms of his attitude, his performance, his on field, his leadership, he's such an incredible role model on and off field. Everyone who's ever met Maxi says he's consistent. Like what you see is what you get. There's no sort of gap between. He's a genuinely good bloke who seems to have the knack of bringing people together. And so, I think he's been a phenomenal captain, and hopefully, he'll be able to focus on his own game a bit this year and not have to front the media and explain stuff that really shouldn't be him explaining
it. Lastly, our forward line. El Diablo asks, do you think our forward line is very underrated? JVR, Frida, Cozzy, just those three are enough to be competitive. Then you can include Milkshake, Turner and Jefferson. Kev Martin asks, did we see any forward line adjustments? At one stage, they structured 5 close to goal at a centre bounce, 3 well back and spread with 2 central about 10 metres beyond the kick-ins outer line. They pushed really high, though both teams did when the ball was in the back third. We made some straight line down the middle leads. They formed a few packs under the high ball where everyone, or at least the talls, competed, and JVR crashed them, bringing a few of the opposition players down. I thought we had plenty of snaps straight out front of the goals. Bidman, former premiership winning defensive coach Troy Chaplin, he's taken over the forward line coaching duties. So were there any forward line specific adjustments in our game plan that you noticed on the weekend?
Before I touch on that question, I saw today on Demonland, source of all good information about all things D's, is that Lego have come on board as a as a sponsor based on, I think, Langford, because he looks very much like a Lego piece. I think that was the clincher. And I did think to myself, the jokes write themselves. Like I can imagine getting my Demons my Demons Lego box home and going, oh, there's no forward line in here. What's going on? Where are all our forward line pieces? So I don't think our forward line is an issue. I didn't think it was an issue last year. I don't think it'll be an issue this year. The key is what we saw a bit on the weekend when we rattled on, I don't know how many goals we kicked in the last quarter. Was it 7 or 8? 6, is that they were based on fast ball movement. You get the fast ball movement in. You don't allow the defenders to get back and clog up the space. You beat the press back, get it over the top. You get JVRs having a one-out look. You get Turner having a one-out look and marking, that mark that I said before from Lindsay. The critical thing is fast ball movement, and so you're getting it into an empty forward line. So it's not the forwards' fault if there's 30 players in there and they can't get a run and jump at it. So if we can get that aspect of the game right, we are potentially a very powerful forward line. You put Fritter back into that side, right there. That's a seriously talented forward line. I've got huge raps on Turner. I reckon he's, I have a feeling he could be just a real star of the game, and we'll start seeing this year. I love his attitude. Like, we can talk all day about Jefferson and that sort of instinctiveness. There is no question in my mind, about Turner's want for the ball. Like, it's first, second, third, fourth efforts, and I said it last year, I said it the year before, and I'm going to keep saying it this year, is that JVR is the most underrated footballer I can see for a long time by D's fans and even external to the club. His numbers, and I've looked at them, he stacks up against the very best forwards in the last 50 years. The Jonathan Browns, the Dermot Breretons, his numbers at this stage of his career match up to the best. His one sort of weakness where he's behind a lot of those players is his contested marking and his marking numbers. As we talked about last year, I think a big factor of that is we're asking the kid to ruck. If we can get him not rucking, he will start clunking more marks. So I think our forward line is in great shape. It'll be interesting though, won't it? I think in terms of if Cos does play in, say 60%, 70% on ball, you can't be in two spots at once. Chandler really has to sort of go up a level, I think, if he's going to be the small forward, and he's got to be putting that pressure on. And and if Sharp can kick goals, if Sparrow can get sort of kicking some goals, I think that's going to be really important to our forward line. It's our medium forwards that really sort of still, I think, are a work in progress. But our talls, I think, are really well positioned.
Totally agree about Turner. I reckon he is the answer that we've been looking for, certainly over the last 12 months. He wasn't available in the first third of last year, and once again had a terrible pre-season and this without the opportunities. But once he started to get on the field, he started to show something, and his aggression is exactly the same as what we've seen with JVR. He will be an absolute second string to the JVR bow that we're up in the forward line. Exactly what we've been looking for. Just that ripper of a mark that he took in that game.
Was a beauty, wasn't it? Yeah,
that was
absolute beauty.
But it showed his aggression. There was no question he was going for that.
Yeah. And even diving, I know, like, it's, of course you're going to mark, but he just, like, he dived forward to get the ball. And I mean, as I said, I think it's really important to remember that he's first AFL pre-season where for the entire pre-season he's trained with the forward group and as a forward. So he's got heaps of scope for improvement. On the question on different tactics, I think we did that a lot. So a lot of what I saw on the Saturday was really similar to how we played in that practice game against the Tigers at this time last year, where, lots of forward handballing, lots of trying to move the ball quick, even more so last year, I reckon, again, at that game down at Casey. Partly because Casey's a proper sized football ground. This ground it's noticeably, it was, when you're there, it's a tiny ground, which I think probably explains a little bit kicking to the hot spot. But I think that's a good point. We did do a lot of those kicks to the hot spot. And that's where, as I said, it's all about bringing the ball to the ground for those forwards, isn't it, George? In terms of the Turners and the JVR, if it can't mark it, you've got to bring it to the ground. And one of the questions for us is, will we have the players at the feet of those packs to be able to convert? Which was one of the real positives, really, that Sharp was able to do that in this game, I thought. So, tactically, I didn't pick that up. That's a good pickup in terms of 5 close to goal at centre bounces. And did you say and 3 well back and spread? It'll be interesting to see what Chaplin brings for the setup. And it was interesting, I didn't pick that up, that Langford started, deep in the goal square, was it?
Yeah, sort of in the goal square or deep forward pocket.
Trying to stretch out that space or create space. So I think the key really is we've got, is the ball movement is what we can, if we can get it in quick and get those players one out. Fritter as well. Forget Fritter. Like, my sense is Fritter's going to play higher up the ground. And if he gets the key for that to work for him is he's got to get back to his defensive numbers and his tackling that he was, like I had a look at his tackling numbers comparing to his goal kicking, and they track every year. Like when 21 was his, was it 22? I can't remember. It was 22, maybe. His high watermark for goals per year tracked with his number of tackles. They were both, his peak for both of them. So, but if he's tackling and aggressive at the ball, and imagine him kicking the ball into JVR with his kicking skills and having him kicking to Turner and inside 50 kicks. I think that's going to be a real interesting watch to see the role he plays, and if we can start using his kicking ability more often as a sort of inside 50. I think he could be a real wild card in terms of how our forward line structures up.
All right. This is the last one. Pew 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 says, another season and another mauling by the umpires. Welcome back, fellas. And let's just say
that has to be one for you, Andy.
Yeah, if this was a home and away game for premiership points, I'd be a lot more fired up. Welcome back, indeed.
It gave me a chance to practice yelling at the umpire a little bit. Like, there were some appalling decisions and non-decisions.
Yeah.
Like, good Lord.
Well, they kicked a number of goals from not only direct free kicks, but 50 metres right into the square. There's probably about 4 of them. Whether they're there or not, I don't know. But
just on them, Larky's a great player, isn't he? And one of the things I really like about him is how neat and accurate his kicking is. But it's very similar. JVR's got a very similar style, not exactly, but 2 or 3 steps, no wasted movements, and Larky's terrific footballer, absolutely.
All right. Well, I think we're going to leave it there for tonight. We'll be back next week to discuss our final practice match before the season officially starts. And then I guess we'll do our season preview show just prior to the start of the season. So stay tuned for that one. We don't have a game in round 0, so that week might be a perfect week to do one. If you want to listen to the show live, then please head on over to demonland.com on Monday night, back at our regular time of 7:30 p.m. And as always, your questions and comments are an integral part of the show. So thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted those questions and comments. Thank you to D Life for Play, Spirit Norm Smith, Jane O2 Man, DeLorean, D Minion, Return to Glory, Red Jacket, What Say What, DG, Radelaide, D Old Fart, Bigfoot, Demons 1858, D in a Kilt, El Diablo 14, Kev Martin, Pew Pew Pew, Picket Fence, Purple 77. Apologies for not getting to your questions, but probably one for our season preview show. And Jabroni, who posted, the pod is back. Life has not been the same without the tones of the 3 amigos. Will be tuning in. Well, I hope you enjoyed our return, Jabroni. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and B-Man, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. We'll be back next week. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.
Come on.